Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video. And today I thought I would do a reading vlog. So I feel like in the first few months of 2025, I did very well at kind of managing to find one day a month where I would have a reading day and just read all day, read a couple of books and make a reading vlog out of it. I really enjoyed doing that, and then I really fell out of it in the second half of the year. To be honest, maybe I only did it for like the first 4 months of the year, but I know I definitely did it at the beginning of 2025, and I would like to start off 2026 trying to do the same thing. I definitely won't have the time to do that every month, but in a month where I do have time to set aside one day just for reading, I will try and do that. So I thought I would do that today, and I will, see how much I get read. So I'm going to start off with a book from my long-term physical TBR. As I mentioned in my goals video a few weeks ago, I'll leave that link down below. I have picked out the 15 books that I think have probably been on my TBR the longest, or at least 15 books that have been on my TBR for quite a while. And I want to read all of them in 2026, and I haven't yet read one in January. So I thought today I would start with Bright I Burn by Molly Aitken. This is a proof copy of a book that came out in 2024. So this has been on my TBR for somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. I wasn't sent this by the publisher specifically. I picked this up at a event that Canongate, the publisher, run, like an influencer event. And I now have more books on my TBR from their event in 2025. So I feel like it's probably about time that I finish reading the books from the 2024 event. So I thought I would try and read Bright I Burn today. This is a book set in 13th century Ireland. I think it'd be quite interesting to read historical fiction set in the 13th century. I feel like most of the historical fiction I read is set quite a lot later than that. And I don't think this is going to take me too long. It's sort of just under 300 pages, but the text is quite big, and there's also like quite a lot of white space on the page. Like there's some chapters that look like this and are just like a dialogue, which looks quite fun actually. So I will give this a go and see how I get on with it. I will say that I feel like in general Canongate publish books that are slightly more on the literary end of my taste, and I have read a few books from Canongate that were just a bit too literary for me. However, saying that, there have been some absolute hits for me from Canongate, particularly thinking of The Coward by Jared McGuinness. I will double check that and put his name down below and put a cover up on the screen. But I loved The Coward. Like, that was an amazing, amazing book. And that wasn't too literary at all. So I will give Bright I Burn a try, and then I will check in later on and see how I get on with this one, and maybe read something else today. Well, I hope I'll read at least one other thing today, but whether I read something very short or something in full today along with this, I don't know. I will see how I go. Hello again, I'm back, and I have finished reading Bright I Burn, which was a very quick read. It's very satisfying to have read a book before lunchtime. That feels really nice. So Bright I Burn was an interesting novel. It wasn't too literary for me, I would say. Like I said, I kind of thought that might be the case, and I wouldn't say it was, but I wouldn't also say that it was 100% a Katie book. But there were some really interesting elements to it. I really liked the writing style, and I liked the sort of use of various form. So there's sort of sections that are basically gossip, like local gossip, just conversations, which I really liked. I thought they worked quite well. That is set in 13th and later 14th century Ireland. It spans a lot of decades, and it tells the story of the life of this woman called Alice. And it's kind of hard to talk about the premise because the book spans a really long period of time, so you get like a lot of her life. We're following her throughout her life, and so a lot of the things that are important and interesting, like in this book, to what extent they're spoilers, I don't know. I knew from the blurb that it was about the first recorded person in Ireland to have been condemned as a witch. And so you kind of know that accusations of witchcraft are coming for Alice. But we follow her from the age of 16, her marriages, her career as a moneylender, and how rumours start to circle around her, partly because of her wealth and partly because men around her keep dying. I kind of hated most of the characters, which I think you're meant to. Alice is an interesting character, but like not a good person. She is selfish and judgmental, spoiled and unaware. And the book kind of uses Alice's life to look at growing fears of witchcraft, although really that is less prevalent than I was expecting it to be. That's sort of present in the end of the book, but less throughout the book. I would say that the book mostly is kind of using Alice's life to look at the experiences of women in 13th century Ireland, to look at class, gender, parenthood. So yes, one book read out of the 15 that have been on my TBR for a while. And I have been thinking about what to read this afternoon. So I think I have two options. I might be able to get through both, I'm not sure. So one is actually another Canongate book, one I picked up at the Canongate event last year in 2025 rather than 2024, and that's a non-fiction book, Foreign Fruit, A Personal History of the Orange by Katie Go. And this is a non-fiction book that is like half a history of the orange and half a memoir about being mixed race. I heard the author talk about this at the Canongate event last year, and it sounded really interesting. And I was thinking that I might read it today while we're in January, because the January prompt for the Read Good Challenge, hosted by Ben Reads Good, is to read a book with some kind of food in the title, and obviously fruit is a food. Basically, I wasn't planning really to take part in the Read Good Challenge. And then as I was watching everyone's goals videos, I was like, oh yeah, that does sound fun. And then I was watching Ben's like announcement video, and he was talking about the prompt for January, and he also mentioned this book. And I was like, oh, I have that book too. And then I remembered that Ben was also at that Canongate event where I got this book. But anyway, I would quite like to read this. I haven't been to read it for a while. Maybe I'll read it in January and see how far I get with the Read Good Challenge. I think I did this last year as well and got up to about March and then stopped. So, you know, I'll probably do that again, but who knows? So yes, I might read this. This isn't very long, but I also feel like non-fiction is harder to read in one sitting. So what I might do is start this, read a few chapters, and if I feel like this is the kind of book I want to read in one sitting, I will do so. And if I don't, then I will put this down and start something else. And something else I will probably read is a Victorian book I've meaning to read for ages, called The Woman Who Didn't by Victoria Cross. That is a pseudonym. And it is a short New Woman novella that is partly a sort of rebuffal / response to another Victorian book called The Woman Who Did, which I read a few years ago and didn't like that much, but found really interesting, found really historically interesting. So I'm quite interested to read like a rebuttal to that. I have made for myself a little like Victorian literature TBR jar, which I'm trying to pick something out of every month. And the book I picked in January was The Woman Who Didn't. And I have been meaning to read it for ages, and it's very short. I don't have a physical copy or a copy of my ebook. I can only read it on my computer, which actually makes for less good a reading vlog, but hey, anyway, it's fine. It's only like 150 pages and the text is quite big. Like, I think it's probably a very short read indeed. So that might be a nice thing to read today too. So I will read a little bit of Foreign Fruit, and I will, yeah, see how I get on and check back in a bit later. I was searching my tea cupboard. Yes, I do have a cupboard just for tea, to see if I had any tea with orange in or any orange tea. I thought I did, but the tea I thought was an orange tea was actually a mango tea. But then I also realised I had an apple tea, so I thought I'd go for some apple tea, which is not quite as appropriate as orange tea, but still. I also realised my bookmark has apples on, as well as hedgehogs. So I'm obviously, you know, ready to read a book about apples, but less so one about oranges. However, I'm really enjoying this so far. I'm on page 45. So I read the first, 44 pages pretty quickly. It's very engaging, so I will keep reading and see how much of this I decide to read today. I feel like you can really tell the sun has now set. It seems much darker in this video, but anyway. So I have been doing some reading this afternoon, and I have made lots of progress with Foreign Fruit. So I'm just over halfway through. In fact, I'm more than over halfway through because there's quite a lot of notes and acknowledgements at the end. So I've only actually got about 50 pages left. Yeah, this is all I have left to read. So I'm hoping I will finish this evening. And yeah, finding this really fascinating so far. And then I've also read in its entirety The Woman Who Didn't. So what should I talk about first? Let's first talk about Foreign Fruit by Katie Go. So yeah, this is really interesting. I'm trying to remember how much I said about this book before I started it. But this book is Katie Go's kind of look at the history of the orange as a fruit and kind of how it came to be eaten in lots of different countries. And with that history of the orange is interwoven a memoir about belonging and identity, about being mixed race, that was in part inspired by the COVID pandemic and the rise of violence against people of Asian heritage during the pandemic. So Katie Go has a white Irish mother, and her father is from Malaysia, but his own parents had emigrated there from China. So there's quite a lot in this book about Katie kind of finding out more about her Malaysian and Chinese family heritage. And I think especially the way Katie Go writes about like being torn between two different places and not always feeling a sense of belonging in either, I think is really interesting. I'll read you a few passages because I think that probably explains it better than I am doing myself. Looking back now, I see that my childhood obsession with authenticity was about trying to feel real. Growing up, I felt out of step in a world that was rigidly organised into categories of difference. I was not Asian or white, but other, not straight or gay, but other, not British or Irish, but other, not Protestant or Catholic, but other. This third hybrid identity had no borders and no models to guide me. Now I know and love so many people who live along the spectrum of other, between what our society considers fixed identities. But I felt alone as a child, and I thought that if I couldn't pin myself to one identity, then I did not exist. I felt half finished, half authentic, and half of something else, which really meant that I totaled nothing. But the world is made of hybrids. Purity is an illusion. We are born of two parents. Even the orange is the offspring of different parents, the mandarin and the Palermo. I feel like that paragraph is probably quite helpful of explaining like how the history of the orange and the orange as a metaphor is used throughout this book. I'm not someone who reads a ton of memoirs, and I feel like I've definitely never read a book like this. Like I read a lot of history books, but not books that use history in this way and that use history to look at like something more personal. I feel like I've never read anything like this before, so that's kind of cool. So yeah, very interesting book so far, and I'm hoping to finish this evening. But before I do, let me tell you a bit about The Woman Who Didn't, which I read on my computer, and yeah, I really enjoyed. It was nice to read actually, because I'm also reading another Victorian book at the moment, on and off. I'm reading Under Two Flags by Ouida, which I am finding interesting, but I'm not loving, and I'm finding the writing style really difficult. And then I started reading The Woman Who Didn't, and I was like, ah yes, here's a Victorian writing style I get along with. And it's just really, really easy to read. It's a very short novella about this man, Evelyn, who is on a ship coming back to Britain, and he meets this woman, Eurydice, and is falling in love with her, but things do not go in the way that he expects. And I kind of don't want to say too much more about it than that. It was really interesting to read this one. Interesting themes, interesting late Victorian sort of New Woman novel that wasn't like as proto-feminist as I was kind of expecting. I do see ways in which it was, and I feel like the female character, Eurydice, was quite interesting, and there was an interesting kind of examination of the position of women within society and the extent to which certain women are trapped, but also a look at duty and loyalty, and sort of being true to your principles in quite an interesting way. It was interesting to read as a response to The Woman Who Did by Grant Allen, which I read a year or two ago. I had lots of problems with The Woman Who Did, though I found it fascinating. But I feel like the problems I had with it and the things I was kind of expecting Victoria Cross to respond to in it were not the things she was responding to, really. She was responding to some other things in it. But I did find it quite interesting to think about as a response. The Woman Who Did, I should explain, is a book about a woman who believes that marriage is, you know, an unequal, unfair institution within late Victorian society. So she says that she will never marry, and when she meets and falls in love with a man, she says, well, I'm happy for us to be together, we can live together, but I will never marry you. And the book is about that. And there are some things about the book that are really, really interesting and that are sort of very pro-feminist. Like, it's a new woman novel in its own way, but there are also things about it that annoyed me. And where you can see the sort of limitations of the time, and also where it's hard to know like exactly what message Grant Allen was going for in the way things pan out in the book. And I kind of had in my head that The Woman Who Didn't would be about a woman who just didn't want to have any relationships with men at all. But that's not what it is. It's something slightly different. But I feel like it looks at being true to your principles, but in a very different way to The Woman Who Didn't. Apparently there were tons of responses to The Woman Who Did. There are like 3 other books. I think there's one called The Woman Who Wouldn't. I kind of want to read the rest because I'm kind of fascinated by how much like discussion this late Victorian novel created. So yeah, I enjoyed The Woman Who Didn't. I thought it was well written with interesting characterization, interesting writing. I feel like I didn't like the narrator, the male character, quite as much as I was meant to, maybe. I kind of thought I was meant to really dislike him, and then at some point I was like, oh, maybe I wasn't. But maybe I was, I don't know. But I found the female character very interesting. And yeah, I found it a nice, easy read with sort of interesting late Victorian social politics and gender norms within it. So yes, I will stop rambling. I'm going to try and finish Foreign Fruit this evening, but I have some videos to film and some other stuff to do before I do. So maybe I will come back and finish this vlog having not read much more, but I will see how I go and I will check in again soon. Hello again, I'm back and I have indeed finished off reading Foreign Fruit. So I've read 3 books today, which is very satisfying. And all 3 really interesting. I thought Foreign Fruit was great. Yeah, like I said earlier, I haven't really read anything like this before. I don't think I've actually ever read like a work of literary non-fiction. Like, I read non-fiction a bit, but I feel like the vast majority of non-fiction I read is history. This is a slightly different genre, partly because it's a memoir, though it does have historical elements in it, but also because it is literary. What do I mean by that? The language is crafted in a way that it's not usually crafted in the non-fiction I read, and the language is very sort of lyrical. You know, I feel like most of the non-fiction I read is history, where the main aim is education, and that's definitely part of this book, but I feel like there's also like a language element, an effort to write sentences that are beautiful in a way that I encounter in fiction and don't usually encounter in non-fiction, which is interesting. And there's sort of almost like language motifs and stuff like that throughout this, which is not like something I'm used to finding in non-fiction. And the subject matter itself is really interesting, and I feel like the way Kate Go writes about identity and history and like combines those 2 things is really interesting. I thought the chapter on Southern California, which talks both about the sort of history of oranges in California, but also the history of Chinese immigration and the way white Americans reacted to Chinese immigration. That stuff is fascinating and really well written. It's quite a tough read, that chapter, but I thought that was especially well done. And in general, I just thought this was a really interesting read, so I'm very glad I read this. So yeah, I've really enjoyed my day of reading. Nice to read some books and to dedicate some proper time to reading. There's something very satisfying for me about reading a book in one sitting. Like, I feel like in a way that's my favourite way to read a book. And obviously, like, there are many books that are too long to read in one sitting, and also, you know, I don't usually have time to sit down and read a book in one sitting, but when I do, I really, really enjoy doing that. So I'm going to wrap up this vlog here, but do let me know down in the comments if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video. I do love reading. Obviously, I feel like you probably knew that already. Why else would I have this channel?